They say you really only know a person when it's too late. I used to think that was just something bitter people said, people who'd had bad luck or made bad choices. I thought I had made the right one. I thought my life was different. But now I know better. Now I know the truth. My name is Elena Brooks, and for most of my adult life, I lived what people from the outside would call a charmed life. A beautiful 4-bedroom colonial on the edge of Westport, Connecticut. Complete with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and a perfectly landscaped backyard that bloomed like a magazine cover every spring. I had two golden retrievers, matching Le Creuset cookware in pastel blues, and a marble-countered kitchen that overlooked the Long Island Sound. It was the kind of house people drove by and said, "Now, that's a home." My husband, Daniel, was a financial advisor who commuted into Manhattan. Always in a suit, always polished, always calm and collected. He even wore cufflinks on Saturdays, as if the man didn't know how to relax. He handled our taxes and our investments. I handled the home and my interior design business. We had no kids, his preference more than mine, though I'd learned to live with it. We traveled, we hosted garden parties, we celebrated holidays in Europe. And we posted just enough of it online to keep up appearances to anyone watching. We looked like the ideal couple. But a pretty picture doesn't mean anything when the frame is cracked. It was a rainy Thursday in late April when everything started to unravel. I remember that because I had just finished rearranging a guest bedroom for a client in New Canaan, and was planning to spend the afternoon curled up with a glass of wine. Daniel had left unusually early that morning, claiming he had back-to-back meetings in the city. He kissed my cheek, said, "I'll be late tonight," and was gone before I could ask anything more. Nothing new. Daniel was a man of routines, but he was also a man of quiet secrets. As I was about to learn, an hour after he left, I found his iPad on the kitchen island. It was neatly stacked on top of the Wall Street Journal and a half-empty coffee cup. He was obsessive about his tech, never left it lying around. I stared at it for a minute, torn between respecting his privacy and acknowledging the gnawing feeling in my gut that something was wrong. I told myself I was just being silly, that it was probably nothing, that I'd drop it off at his office and laugh about it later. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was survival. Either way, I tapped the screen. The device wasn't locked. That was the first surprise. The second was the open email app. Hundreds of unread messages, but one thread near the top was marked with a heart, not a flag, not a star, a heart. I tapped it. The name that popped up was Caroline M., and it didn't take long to gather who she was. She signed off one of the messages with, "Can't wait to finally have you to myself. London will be perfect." My hands started shaking, but I kept scrolling. There were dozens of emails, some casual, some intimate, all damning. She was a corporate attorney based in Boston, and apparently she'd been seeing my husband for at least 6 months. She referenced dinners, gifts, flights, even some kind of long-term plan. But the real gut punch came when I found a folder in the Files app, buried innocuously under the name Wills and Shifts. Inside was a document titled draft_divorce_petition.pdf. When I opened it, I nearly dropped the iPad. There it was. My full name. His full name. A prepared petition for divorce. It wasn't dated, but it was finalized. He had filled in every section: assets, properties, projected alimony. All of it was outlined like a blueprint for my erasure. And the worst part? There was no mention of me getting the house. No mention of the joint account we'd saved into for over a decade. It was clear he planned to hit me with this the moment it was convenient. Probably after the London trip. Probably once he'd tied up any loose ends that might cost him too much money. I sat there, frozen, the sound of the rain growing louder outside. My heart was pounding, my mouth dry. I closed the iPad like it might explode. For maybe 2 full minutes, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. And then, slowly, a realization settled over me like a calm, bitter fog. He was going to leave me, take everything, and act like he was doing me a favor. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I walked into the living room, sat down in the armchair he liked so much, the one I had picked out and he took credit for, and I stared at the fireplace. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to be the sad woman picking up the pieces. I wasn't going to be the last to know, the one left holding the unpaid bills and broken promises. I wasn't going to beg him to reconsider. I wasn't going to give him that kind of power. Something hardened in me, a quiet, deliberate fire. I didn't know all the steps yet. But I knew this: if he was planning a future without me, he sure as hell wasn't going to do it with my money, my time, or my silence. If Daniel wanted a war, he was going to get one, and this time, I'd be 3 moves ahead. The moment I closed the iPad and set it back on the counter, I felt like I had just touched a live wire. Every nerve in my body was firing, not from heartbreak that came later in a quieter, lonelier wave, but from something else entirely. Adrenaline. Cold, hard adrenaline. The kind that tells you this isn't just pain. This is a battle. And you'd better act fast, or you'll lose everything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak. Instead, I poured myself a glass of Cabernet. A full glass, even though it was barely noon. I held the stem tight between two shaking fingers and stared out the rain-speckled window of the kitchen. The sound was gray, restless. I knew I couldn't stay in shock too long. Daniel was always 5 steps ahead in business, and if he was planning a divorce, that meant he'd already made his financial moves. The next 2 hours, I wandered through the house in a fog of rage and calculation. I passed the leather armchair he had insisted on for his reading nook, the one I had sourced, ordered, and assembled while he was in Chicago for a seminar. I paused in front of the oil painting we bought in Savannah, Georgia on our 7th anniversary, which he claimed to love but always referred to as your little art piece, in the walk-in closet. I found the pair of Jimmy shoes he gave me last Christmas. I remember how touched I was at the time. Now I wondered what Caroline had received that week. I stopped in the bedroom and sat down on the edge of the bed we once shared like strangers. That's when I remembered something important. Daniel wasn't the only one with secrets. Several years ago, I had watched my friend Lena, a woman I met in design school, go through an absolutely vicious divorce in Denver. Her husband had drained their joint savings before she even knew they were splitting. She had no income, no assets in her name, and had to move back in with her parents at 38. After watching that unfold, I'd made a quiet decision, just a backup plan. I told myself at the time. I opened a private account. Nothing shady, just discreet. I used an LLC I created for my design business and set up a Barclays account in Delaware, linked to a P.O. box I rented in New Haven. I deposited small amounts whenever I had a successful client project, $3,000 here, $5,500 there. At the time, it felt like a tiny insurance policy. By the time I logged in that afternoon, my hands still trembling, the balance read $318,700. I stared at the number. It wasn't just money. It was leverage. It was survival. I wasn't done. In Greenwich, I had a safe deposit box that Daniel didn't know about, another quiet choice. This one courtesy of my father, who had always warned me to keep something off the books, just in case. Inside were 5 gold coins, gifted to me years ago when he passed. They were minted in the UK British sovereigns, each one now worth over $14,000. I had checked recently out of curiosity. That put their total value around $70,000. I took a deep breath and made a mental list. Step 1, preserve everything I owned. Step 2, get legal help. Step 3, make a move before Daniel did. That evening, I called Claire Marshall, an old friend from college who had lived through a nightmare divorce in Chicago. Her ex had been cruel, manipulative, and relentless, but he hadn't counted on Claire hiring a shark in heels. You need to call Michelle Keating, Claire said. She's in New York. If Daniel tries anything shady, she'll pin him to the courtroom wall with it. That night, I sent Michelle an email. By Friday morning, I was sitting across from her in her sleek office in Midtown Manhattan, the skyline looming behind her like a witness. She flipped through the printed emails I'd brought, reading silently with the precision of someone who'd seen every kind of betrayal in black and white. Then she looked up at me and said, "You're smart to come now." I nodded, though I didn't feel smart. I felt like someone trying not to drown. Michelle continued, tapping the paper. This phrasing here, this is how they frame a narrative of abandonment. He's setting the stage to look like the victim. If you hadn't found this, he'd blindside you and argue you left him. My stomach churned. I had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. But we're going to take control, Michelle said. Her voice was calm, direct, surgical. First, we move all your liquid assets. Anything in your name alone, we protect it. Second, I'm filing for a financial injunction. He won't be able to withdraw, sell, or hide a single dollar without court approval. I nodded again, this time slower. And third, she added, her eyes narrowing just slightly, we let him think he's still in control. Until he isn't. I left her office with a thick folder labeled Brooks v. Brooks. Seeing my name like that, divided by the word versus, hit harder than I expected. It made everything undeniable. But it also made it official. I wasn't going to be the woman on the sidelines of my own collapse. By Sunday night, I had already moved half of my personal belongings into a short-term luxury apartment in Soho just off Spring Street. It wasn't grand, but it was safe, modern, and mine. I paid 6 months upfront, $21,000, withdrawn from the Delaware account. I told Daniel I had taken on a high-profile design project for a wealthy international client and needed space in the city to work undisturbed. He barely looked up from his phone when I told him. Sounds good. Just send me the bill, he muttered. I smiled and told him not to worry, I had it covered. That was his mistake. Because now I had eyes on everything. And I wasn't done yet. By Monday morning, I'd been living in my Soho apartment for exactly 2 days. It was still unfamiliar to quiet, to minimalist, and a little to white. But I liked it that way. No framed wedding photos on the nightstand, no dent in the sofa cushion from where Daniel used to sit and scroll through financial news. This place didn't have any ghosts. It gave me room to breathe, to think, to plan. I hadn't told anyone where I was, not my mother in Vermont, not my sister in Philadelphia, and certainly not Daniel. As far as he was concerned, I was working on a demanding design project for an international client, and I needed peace and privacy to focus. I made sure he believed I was doing him a favor by staying away. In truth, I was doing myself the biggest favor of my life. Every day that week, I met with Michelle Keating, my attorney in Manhattan. Her office was a sleek, steel and glass fortress near Bryant Park, where the elevators moved silently and the receptionist never blinked. Michelle wasn't warm, but she was focused, laser sharp, and she believed in going on the offensive. We began by reviewing my entire financial history, everything I had in my name, and everything I suspected Daniel was hiding. Together, we created a detailed financial disclosure packet. Then her team's forensic accountant, an intense woman named Therese, who dressed like a librarian but had the instincts of a bloodhound, started digging into Daniel's investment history. By Wednesday, Therese found something. "Take a look at this," she said, spinning a laptop toward me during our meeting. "Here's a transfer of $280,000 to a Florida-based LLC. The business name is Cumberland Ventures. On the surface, it looks like a landscaping startup." "A landscaping startup?" I asked. Michelle raised an eyebrow. "Daniel can barely keep our rose bushes alive." We kept digging. No website, no business address, no employee records. It was a shell, a container for money Daniel didn't want anyone tracing. I felt a flicker of vindication and fury. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was actively moving our marital money into a black hole. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I'd be too busy choosing curtain patterns and planning brunches to ask about shell corporations and out-of-state wire transfers. That was his second mistake. By Thursday, Michelle had filed a motion for an emergency hearing in Manhattan Supreme Court, requesting an immediate freeze on all marital assets due to suspected financial misconduct. The hearing was set for Friday morning, and that's when we put the final piece of the trap in place. I texted Daniel that evening, "Hey, can you meet me in the city tomorrow? My bank needs you to verify some paperwork for the business account. Shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. He responded in less than 10 seconds, "Sure." "What time?" I told him 9:30 a.m. By Friday at 9:43 a.m., Daniel Brooks walked into courtroom for expecting to sign a few forms and maybe grab an espresso afterward. Instead, he saw me. Not the me he was used to, the wife in yoga pants and a soft voice who asked permission to spend. No. I was dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, black heels, hair slicked into a twist, not a single tremor in my hands. Michelle Keating sat to my left, calmly flipping through the documents on the table in front of us. Daniel's face turned ghost white. He tried to sit next to me, confused and disoriented. Michelle didn't even look up. She simply gestured across the aisle with a pen and said, "Other side, Mr. Brooks." His eyes darted between us. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," Michelle said, sliding a thick folder toward the judge, "is a motion to freeze all marital assets due to evidence of undisclosed financial transfers, specifically a shell entity registered in Florida. We are requesting an emergency injunction to prevent further dissipation of marital property." Daniel's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to respond, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Brooks." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the judge. My heart pounded, but I didn't show it. I'd spent 12 years mastering the art of stillness, of holding my breath around a man who believed silence was a form of loyalty. Within 20 minutes, the judge signed the injunction. Daniel was legally barred from accessing or moving any funds in our joint accounts, our brokerage portfolio, or any investment vehicle until full financial disclosures had been reviewed by the court. His fury was quiet, but it was there. It always had been. As we gathered our documents to leave, Daniel leaned across the aisle and hissed, "You're going to regret this." For a moment, I saw the mask slip. The man underneath the charm and the crisp suits, the one who had built a quiet plan to discard me like a business asset. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I didn't feel fear. I felt power. I leaned in just slightly, my voice steady. "You were never going to protect me, Daniel. So I did it myself." He didn't speak again. We left the courtroom separately, him surrounded by tension, me wrapped in silence. Outside, the spring air was cool but light. I looked up at the tall buildings around me, the early morning sun warming the sidewalks, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. 12 years of quiet submission, polite conversations, and swallowed truths had peeled off me like an old skin. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was my own damn rescue. 1 week. That's all it took to unravel the life I'd spent 12 years building. 7 days. It's strange how time can feel so short and yet stretch wide enough to fit an entirely new version of yourself inside it. A week ago, I was a woman quietly baking blueberry muffins in a perfect house for a man who was planning to leave me. Today, I am something else entirely. It was a Saturday morning when I finally sat still long enough to breathe. The early sun poured in through the oversized windows of my new apartment in Soho, casting long shadows across the concrete floors. I was curled up on a navy velvet chair by the window, sipping coffee, real coffee, freshly ground, something Daniel used to call fussy. The irony made me smile. From where I sat, I could see Mercer Street coming to life, joggers passing by, a woman walking her French bulldog, delivery trucks backing up with the day's inventory for the shops below. None of them knew what kind of week I'd just had, and none of them needed to. Daniel had finally broken the silence on Wednesday, sending an email so long it crashed my phone. No subject line, no structure, just a clumsy apology wrapped in excuses about pressure and timing and clarity. He claimed he never really intended to go through with the divorce petition, that it was a placeholder while he worked things out. He begged me not to tell anyone about the Florida shell company, said it would ruin him, that he still cared about me and didn't want to see either of us hurt. Then came the offer for $150,000 in cash and he'd walk away clean. No court battle, no media attention, no bad blood. I didn't even reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Michelle. She called me 3 minutes later, laughing so hard she had to put me on speakerphone. Let him squirm, she said. That's the smell of fear. We're not taking a dime less than you're entitled to, and we're absolutely going after spousal support. The truth was, Daniel wasn't just a liar and a coward, he was a fraud. Our forensic accountant found records that showed he had quietly diverted investment fees from 3 of his private clients over the last 18 months, small amounts, deliberately spread out, but enough to raise serious red flags. Michelle was already drafting letters to the regulatory board. If this went public, he could lose his license, his firm, and his carefully constructed image. I wasn't angry anymore, I was done. The house in Westport, that beautiful white colonial I had once loved so deeply, was listed for $1.89 million by Friday afternoon. Michelle filed for a restraining order that barred Daniel from stepping foot on the property unless supervised. When I returned to pack up my things, I didn't linger. I didn't cry in the doorway or sit on the porch one last time. I walked through each room like it was a hotel I'd once visited. Familiar but no longer mine. I left behind the wedding china, the patio furniture, even the monogram towels. But I took the dogs. He didn't protest. Maybe he knew better than to try. With the proceeds from my private account in Delaware and the gold coins from my father's safe deposit box, I bought a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. A quiet street, a beautiful space, 3 stories, exposed brick, a small fenced garden in the back. I paid $1.17 million in full. No mortgage, no co-signer, no man hovering behind me, double-checking the math. It was mine, every inch of it. The top floor, once a guest suite, I turned into a studio for my design business. I gave it a new name, Brooks & Co. I liked the simplicity of it. Clean, strong. Rooted in my name, not his. The first time I unlocked the door to that space, it felt different than any other place I'd lived. Not because it was grand, but because it was mine on every level. No compromises. No illusions. No pretending. Sometimes, when the nights are especially quiet and the city hums softly in the background, I feel that ache. It's not pain, exactly. More like a ghost, the echo of 12 years I gave to someone who was never truly with me. I think about the holidays we spent in Europe, the dinner parties in Westport, the long road trips up the coast. I think about all the times I made excuses for him or downplayed my own needs to keep the peace. And for a brief second, I grieved that version of myself, the one who stayed too long, trusted too easily, loved without asking enough in return. But the ache never lasts. Because here's what I've come to understand: the moment I moved my assets, I moved my life. The moment I stopped waiting for Daniel to tell me the truth, I started telling it to myself. I didn't wait for him to destroy me. I saved myself first. There is a kind of power in that decision, a quiet, steady kind that doesn't need an audience. I don't need anyone to clap for me. I don't need him to acknowledge what he did. I don't even care if he ever understands what he lost. That's not my job anymore. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you don't need to wait for the explosion to rebuild. You don't need to wait for someone to show you how broken they are before you choose yourself. You can walk out before the fire starts. You can light your own match, and when you do, you'll be amazed at how bright it burns.